Imagine a leader who achieves absolute, undisputed power over an entire region, has his enemies entirely at his mercy, and then completely refuses to seek revenge. What kind of society produces a person like that? To understand him, we have to look at the world he was born into. This early photograph shows the Kaaba in Mecca. In the 7th century, this area was a ruthless commercial hub driven by tribal arrogance. The sanctuary was filled with 360 idols, turning religious pilgrimage into a highly lucrative enterprise for the local elite. The social hierarchy was violently strict. Wealthy tribal leaders held absolute authority. Slavery was an economic engine, and the vulnerable, especially orphans and women, were routinely stripped of basic human rights and treated as property. Yet navigating the exact center of this corrupt trade network was a young man named Muhammad. He was orphaned at a young age, had no wealth, and yet operated with such pristine, unbreakable integrity in his business dealings that the very people profiting from corruption gave him 2 titles, Al-Sadiq, the truthful, and Al-Amin, the trustworthy. Long before any theological claims were made, his daily life presented a problem for the Meccan elites. A man operating with complete honesty and equity stood in direct opposition to a system built on exploitation. Looking at this steep, rocky entrance to the cave of Seerah, you get a sense of the absolute isolation he sought. At the age of 40, during one of his retreats into this mountain, he experienced the first revelation, beginning with a single command, Iqra, meaning read. The sheer psychological weight of the encounter was overwhelming. He didn't return to the city in a state of triumphant ecstasy. He rushed down the mountain terrified, trembling, and entirely unsure of what he had just witnessed. He turned immediately to his wife, Khadija. It was her clarity that anchored him. She reminded him of his own track record, a man who consistently fed the poor, cared for orphans, and upheld his promises would not be abandoned or deceived by the divine. This manuscript page physically records the text that would follow. At its core, the message carried a highly disruptive doctrine, absolute human equality. It declared that an enslaved person had the exact same spiritual and human worth as the wealthiest Meccan chief. The Meccan leadership understood the implications immediately. A doctrine demanding equal treatment and the end of financial exploitation would shatter their monopoly on power. They resolved to crush the movement entirely. The elites first tried bribery. They offered him wealth, tribal leadership, and status if he would simply stop speaking about equality. He refused. The pushback escalated to physical violence. The elites targeted the most vulnerable early Muslims. Enslaved believers were stripped, dragged out into the midday sun, and pinned beneath heavy boulders on the burning desert sand to force a recantation. Through years of this abuse, the Prophet modeled the concept of sabr, a profound, enduring patience. Even as he was personally attacked in the streets, he categorically refused to curse his oppressors. The persecution culminated when he traveled to the neighboring city of Taif seeking a safe haven. Instead of offering asylum, the Say leaders ordered their youth to chase him out. They pelted him with stones until his shoes were filled with his own blood. Exhausted and bleeding by the side of the road, he was presented with a divine choice. The angel of the mountains offered to collapse the surrounding peaks and bury the city of Taif entirely. He declined. He chose to forgive the people of Taif and pray for their descendants instead. His response proved that real strength is found in radical mercy, overriding the human instinct for retaliation. Eventually, the Muslims were forced to leave their homes entirely. Looking at the scale of a historical desert migration camp like this helps us grasp the reality of the hijrah to the city of Medina. This was a strategic relocation to build a functional, egalitarian society from the ground up. In Medina, he faced a massive political hurdle. He had to take fiercely independent local tribes who had been warring for generations, mix them with the new refugees arriving from Mecca, and bind them together. The mechanism he used to lock these groups together was insaf, absolute justice. Under his new constitution, legal equality overrode all previous tribal allegiances. The ultimate test of this system occurred when a woman from a powerful, elite family committed theft. The tribal leaders assumed her status would grant her immunity and tried to intercede on her behalf. The prophet publicly rejected them, declaring that even if his own daughter committed the crime, she would face the exact same legal consequence. By replacing the ancient shield of elite privilege with a system of universal accountability, the community in Medina stabilized and thrived. 8 years after being driven out under the threat of assassination, the Muslims marched back toward Mecca. This time, they arrived with an overwhelming force of 10,000 people, completely reversing the balance of power. Inside the city, the Meccan elites were terrified. These were the exact individuals who had tortured the early believers, confiscated their wealth, and waged years of war against them. By every metric of 7th century tribal warfare, they were waiting for a mass execution. Standing before the terrified crowd, the prophet delivered his verdict. He offered them absolute, unconditional amnesty. He told his former torturers, "Today there is no blame on you. Go, for you are free." There was no bloodbath. He dismantled the physical idols around the Kaaba, but his refusal to spill blood broke the generational cycle of vengeance. His lifelong mission was always the conquest of human hearts, not the acquisition of territory. As the undisputed leader of the entire Arabian Peninsula, he had access to immense wealth and power. Yet in private, he continued to sleep on a simple mat, mend his own shoes, patch his own clothes, and help his family with daily household chores. In his farewell sermon, he addressed the gathered thousands to directly challenge the foundation of tribal hierarchy. He declared that no Arab has superiority over a non-Arab, and no white person has superiority over a black person, except through piety and good action. When he passed away shortly after, he left a grieving populace, but he also left behind a specific, recorded standard for human conduct that would spread across the globe. Revering his legacy is a call to action. It means taking those pillars of truth, justice, and radical mercy and applying them to the complications of our modern lives. Share his true story.